showing the visual proof is a lot better when it comes to the secondary images. That by far has the highest conversion, and that video should be talking about the number one decision making factor or the number one objection that sellers have. I think the journey from second, third, fourth, I think the sale should be done over there. One of these extremes should be in your images to make your image stack a lot more powerful for high conversions. You have to sell them before they get a notification on their cell phone. We have already started missing authenticity already, and I think the users on Amazon, they're not realizing it yet, but that's exactly what they're gonna feel.
Again, I really appreciate you being a guest. I really appreciate you coming on and talk about this. It's something that is a more common topic, but I feel like it's the level that we're going to get into today is different than what you normally hear on other Amazon podcasts, or even maybe that I've discussed in the past. So I'm excited to get into the nitty gritty on how to improve your click through rate and your conversion rate. So, Kamal, it's a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me, Pete. I'm super excited for today's topic. Dive into traffic and conversion. Using creative. So, one of my something I'm super passionate about.
Yeah. I want to get into it right away, but at first I want to give you a chance, a quick 30-second elevator pitch to explain your background, how you got into e-commerce, and also your expertise.
Okay, sounds good. It'll probably be more than 30 seconds. So, if you don't know me, my name is Kamal. I'm the founder and CEO of AMG OneStep, which is an Amazon's creative agency, and I also started a SaaS platform which generates high converting Amazon images for Amazon sellers, within like seconds, if not minutes. So that's who I am, what I do. I started selling on Amazon in 2015. I'm originally from India. I'm in India right now, but I normally live in Canada, Alberta, Edmonton, Alberta. So that's where I've been living, since 2013. I moved to Canada in 2010, and I started selling on Amazon in 2015 as a retail arbitrage, online arbitrage. Ended up doing private label. Then somehow, from my network, I started, an Amazon agency, and from there, it's just been a, cycle of things over and over again.
Love it. Yeah, I'm excited to get into just basically that today. Talking about the best ways to improve conversion rate through the different types of image optimization, content optimization, all this kind of good stuff. I definitely want to get into a lot of topics today. So I'm going to start us off with looking specifically at maybe conversion rate versus click through rate, and talking about the different metrics there, and talking about not the different meanings per se, but the different ways that images affect them. So really, I'll start with that question. What is the direct impact that, and this might be a very broad question for you, Kamal, I'm sorry, but what is the direct impact that content has on your conversion, your click through rate?
Yeah, I think if you're not like a huge brand, then this is the number one factor which impacts your conversion rate. The good content, if you have great content, your conversion rate are going to be better. It's going to be directly proportional to that. That's number one, like high conversion rate. But that's like a direct impact. There's like indirect impact as well. You're going to get lesser returns, which means you're going to have more profits, which also means you can charge more, because if your conversion rate is more, your ads will be more profitable. And also, you can charge more, which means your overall margins on that product are going to be higher. So that's like another indirect effect. Another indirect effect is, you position yourself as a very solid, as a solid brand, right? And which, if you have a great storefront, which can also increase your like repeat buyer percentage. So that I can go on and on. So the direct impact is the high conversion rate, but there's like lots
Right.
of indirect impacts of having great content on your listing.
Right, and I wanna get into the nitty-gritty or the granular of content specifically. So, the first one, of course, is always the main image. It's always, I think that's, you would agree, and maybe you won't agree, and that'd be a fun disagreement, but I think the main image is always the most important, right, for conversion rate. And everyone's heard that before. So tell me a little bit more about maybe the second image or the image stack or the first four. What makes that so important for sellers to really get right, so that they don't lose people that are, bouncing off of their product page, or uh, what in your experience has made the most, impact on the image stack?
Yeah. In the image stack, what has made by far the number one thing which comes to my mind is the use of visual references. So, what do I mean by that? So, visual reference is something that your image, is showing your product's feature or benefit across, not in not in a traditional way, but using a visual reference. And the visual reference, for example, let's say you're selling, um, you know, let's just you're selling a delivery bag, and your target audience is a DoorDash driver or Uber Eats driver, right? So you have two options. Option number one, which is very traditional, for the extra large delivery bag. So your feature is extra large, and how you the option number one, you can tell the dimensions like, hey, this is 12 inches wide or 24 inches tall or whatever those numbers are, right? That's one option. The option number two is the visual reference, like how many extra large pizzas that bag can carry. Now, the person who's the ideal customer for that product, which is the target audience, they can instantly think, "Oh man, that now I can carry like two extra pizzas in this bag." So that's a visual reference, right? So the concept of visual reference, if you use a visual reference in your secondary images, that's going to have the number one biggest impact when it comes to the conversions. That's like one example. Every single product, you tell me a product, you tell me if product's feature, like, I can think of like, like five different visual references. You can use like Chat GPT, you can use like a lot of other things like, hey, for example, like if you're like, I always like to show this image. It's, let's say you're selling a shelf, which is like a dressing shelf or something like that, or mechanic shelf, right? So it has like lots of shelves and it has like lots of hooks. So you're showing the actual weight, like the dumbbells on each shelf and weights on the each hook. And then there's like a person standing right next to the shelf. So the person standing next to the shelf is the visual reference for the height, and those weights are the visual reference, how much weight it can carry. So yeah, just showing it, showing the visual proof is a lot better when it comes to the secondary images. That by far has the highest conversion rate.
Okay, it makes sense. I like to always say to partners that come in to us that you want to show the customer themselves using the product and the benefit of it. And it's also from a conversion rate point of view, it's also important. You only have about, I think the average they say is 8 seconds people spend on a listing, maybe in the US. So you've got very little time to really capture that. So it makes sense to want to get that right in those first couple of images. We've been really emphasizing that here as well. It's just, that first four images are really all you get in a realistic, from the majority of customers. It's those first, maybe even less than that, maybe three or four images. So, um, yeah, and it's also important too with the video on your product detail page. So I'd be curious to know if there's any examples you have or any sort of A/B test that you might have found where one style of video works better than the other for either retaining people on the page or even sometimes getting them to convert. Um, I know that some customers probably don't always make it to the video, but in your experience, Kamal, have you seen a difference where one style of video does better than another on the product detail page?
I think the answer is like it depends. Like for certain categories, like there are some winning types of videos that you can do. What I've seen like really, really good results is UGC videos, and that works really well for supplement categories, right? So I have seen like really good results there. But when it comes to, for example, a little bit more technical or mechanical product, then how to use or how to assemble, these kind of videos tend to perform a lot better, right? And for example, if it's like a super competitive category, let's say electronics, then the brand videos, those kind of videos tend to perform really, really well. So I would say that there's no like there's no like one size fits all for when it comes to the video, but the video is being watched by the bottom of the funnel when they're almost like ready to buy, and that video should be talking about the number one decision making factor or the number one objection that sellers have, right? So if it's around that one, then the video will convert like way better.
Mhm.
And a bad video, it's like I always say that like having a no video is okay than having a bad video. Like don't have a bad video which talks about like random stuff and which can bounce the people who are at the bottom of the funnel. So just so yeah, it's to short answer is like it really depends on what kind of product you're selling.
On that as well, sort of the bottom funnel and looking at the different style of, or the different, places that people are shopping, I think mobile conversion is usually much lower, right, than desktop because just because there's more people on mobile, that percentage might be a little bit skewed, but either way, the conversion rate on mobile is usually a little bit lower. When you're looking at a listing, right, and trying to figure out ways that they might be losing conversions, what's maybe a few different things that you see that the sellers are doing that's making mobile shoppers either bounce or not follow through with a purchase? What's something that you notice on the detail pages that is turning people away?
Yeah, I think the when you're talking about the mobile optimization and like why is the bounce rate like so high on the bound on the mobile, I think number one thing which comes to mind, it's overall the nature of mobile. Like it's very distracting. There's like a bunch of other apps, they're getting notifications, and the overall behavior on the cell phone, like people they're either swiping left to right or they're just going up and up, right? So the overall psychology of like buyer is totally different. When somebody's like like browsing on a desktop, they're like more focused. In general, there's like a lot lesser distractions. So there's like few things which can which can impact your bounce off rate. Is number one is like there's no storytelling across the images. For example, if the if your main image is like uh stopping the scroll, you win the click. But what's on the second image? What's on the third one, fourth, fifth? I think the journey from second, third, fourth, I think the sale should be done over there. Like if they don't find your product interesting enough, if you cannot convey your product's like unique selling proposition or what makes your product different, why they should be buying your product, or like is your second are your secondary images like speaking with the ideal customer avatar, like is or are those like generic images? If what can then person can like say, oh that's me, oh that's for me, right? That's when the sale happens on mobile, right? You need to have like instant connection, otherwise they're going to bounce off, right? And how can um and how do you make your secondary images so sticky that people say, oh that's me, right? So how many
Right.
times you have seen images on Amazon, like they're so generic, like I've seen like so many images like hey, it's waterproof, it's durable, it's FDA approved, it's like
Right.
I just there's so many things, BPA free, there's like so many things which are true to every other competitor, right? I always give this example. Like I was doing a listing. One of my clients, they were selling plastic cups, with lids. And when I looked at like 15 different competitors on page number one, page number two, all of those competitors, they had like the same generic features. It was waterproof, it was leak proof, it was BPA free, it was recyclable. It's like it was stylish, so many other things, and which was like true for every single competitor. And when we did the reviews analysis and when we made the customer avatar, like who exactly was buying that product, we found out that people were buying this product because they did not want to spend $5 to $7 on coffee every single morning. And they did not want to wait at the drive through 15 minutes every single morning before going to work. That's why they were buying disposable plastic cups so that they can make coffee at home and just go to the work, right? Save some money and also look stylish, right?
Right.
So, like, those were the reasons why people were buying those, you know, buying that product. And no competitor, like nobody was actually talking about those things on their listing. And when you make listings around your customer avatar, the secondary images, second image, third image, fourth, whether it's like a desktop or whether it's or
Mhm.
on mobile, when they that's when they instantly say, "Oh, that's me. This is
Right.
exactly what I was looking for." Then add to cart happen, and the bounce rate is way lesser. So that's what
Right.
I worked really well for mobile.
Yeah. You mentioned a lot of interesting things there. The first thing was the psychology of the purchase, and maybe I'm overthinking this, but can you talk more about how the content, obviously you have the sales funnel and different levels of people that are know about your product, don't know about your product, are interested, are right there at the bottom about to buy it. But can you talk a little bit more about how the content on a product detail page across the whole thing, image stacked, A plus content, brand story, the video, can we talk a little bit more about how that affects not only the conversion rate, but also the this really the psychology of it, of the inside of the shopper's mind when they're looking at your content, and how you guys at Amazon OneStep are helping people unlock that psychology a little bit more.
I think it's the time to value, like especially on the cell phone, right? Because you're not just competing with the other listings on Amazon. You're competing with bunch of apps that they have downloaded and the notifications that they're getting. So the sooner you can get them to the value, the higher the conversion rate is going to be, right? If they have to spend a lot more time, which means in that meantime, there's going to be a lot more distractions. So
Mhm,
So the faster you can convey like why they should be buying this product, that's number one. But then there's like multiple frameworks that we use to make that happen. One, like I mentioned, like concept of visual references, that works really well. Second framework I mentioned, like the images should be speaking directly with the customer avatar. And the other
mhm,
thing we like to do is creating your images around like three extremes. At least one of those extremes should be in your images: extreme conditions, extreme use, and extreme emotions. One of these extremes should be in your images to make your image stack a lot more powerful for high conversions. For example, you're selling anti-slip bathroom mat. So the feature is it protects you from slipping. Now think of extreme emotions. Maybe a pregnant lady, carrying baby inside her tummy, and she's just stepping onto that anti-slip bathroom mat. That's extremely emotional. Even if your listing does not have reviews, people will trust that image, right? That's an extreme emotion. For example, extreme use case could be, if you're selling a vacuum cleaner, maybe very messy carpet where there's like five dogs and there's lots of dog hair, and it's like perfectly cleaning the carpet. That's an extreme
mhm.
use. Or maybe an outdoor camera in a very stormy night, something like that. Or even
Right.
then there's like extreme in that's like more extreme condition too. So like think of your images like the lifestyle images or an infographic, like does it take that feature or benefit to the extreme or not? Does it, so like that's like another framework that we like to have. It's like another ingredient of having good
Mhm.
content, like Russell Brunson talks about like what's the word, dramatic demonstration. If you can
Right.
do dramatic demonstration on your listing, I think like that's a great ingredient in, like you combined with the visual references, the customer avatar, dramatic demonstration, all of these things
Right.
help you get to reduce the time to value, right? So
Right.
that the faster, you have to sell them before they get a notification on their cell phone,
Right.
right?
Right.
So
You had before they click out of it and then they forget. It's very interesting. It's very, very interesting. I've never really thought about it in that regard, because you think, again, you think mobile, the conversion rate's down because there's just so many more people on there, and so the percentage has to be lower. But you're right. There are a lot of other factors that go into it. Of they just forget about it. They are picky. They just want to keep scrolling. That's very neat. It's a very neat and I like the quote of, "Do your images show the extreme? Do your images take your product benefits to the extreme?" That might be our quote for the episode. But it's also interesting too to kind of tie in, of course, the big topic always is AI. And I think AI would affect, and again, you can agree or disagree, but I think the AI would affect a customer's psychology just as much of if they're seeing these maybe 3D rendered images or these photoshopped images. And I think you guys, right, are big on the real photography, and using actual, not actual, because obviously, of course, you're editing them a little bit, but you're using actual photos. So have you seen this discomfort? Have you seen AI getting, I mean, of course, it's getting more and more realistic looking, but do you think people are still gonna look at it and say, "Oh, I can tell that's AI and I don't like it?" You know, are you seeing that end? Are you seeing a pushback there?
I think that's a very interesting one. I think I don't know what will happen in you know in the next coming years, but what I can sense from LinkedIn when I'm like, I'm reading all those like AI generated posts, and I'm reading like all those like AI generated comments. Me as a, me as a user of LinkedIn, now I'm looking for authenticity. I don't
Mhm.
care if your, if your post has grammatical error or not. I can spot that, man, this is authentic. This coming, you personally wrote it. Sometimes my friends send me messages which are like AI written, and I tell to myself, I'm like, bro, like, even if you have sent me, I
A text message?
even like if
Like, or
WhatsApp message, like for example, someone
yeah,
like me, I come from, like my background is from, India, like English
right,
is our second language. A lot of my
right,
friends, their English is also second language, and then they use ChatGPT to write a message, and then they send it over to me. I'm like, or the emails, right? Then I'm like, bro, like you're my friend. Like, why are you using
yeah,
ChatGPT to send me something? And I think like we have already started missing authenticity already, and I think the users on Amazon, they're not realizing it yet, but that's exactly what they're going to feel in the coming years when the whole content, the AI generated images, AI generated videos, AI generated A plus content. I think the buyers will start to prefer the ugly looking, um, probably, the content which is more authentic, or they're gonna
right,
miss like the real pictures or the real humans, and the moment they see those, and they're gonna be like, oh man, like I like this one. So that's what I think
right.
will happen, but I could be wrong, and I think it's too early for me to say anything, but that's something I have felt.
That's so funny that people will prefer the messier looking ones, not necessarily that they're messy, you know, that they're not they're unoriginal or that they're gross, but that they feel more authentic. That's so interesting. Sometimes, uh, uh, yeah, that's just something that very interesting to think about. That maybe in 5 years we'll be so sick of AI, or so sick of maybe even so sick of the almost too polished listing where you don't feel the soul, like, there's not a lot of color in it anymore, it's very business, it's very, I don't even know, it looks like it's very corporate, like it's lost its soul, that people will wanna go back to the more, like you said, the messier, the more involved, the more human looking,
Right?
um,
It's
images or
and
content.
and we don't know what the future would be like. Nobody knew like
Right.
UGC videos like few years ago. Like, that's like whole new concept.
Yeah.
We don't know like what whole new concept would be in the future. But yeah, I think it's but people are gonna get tired of like, just seeing AI or all over Amazon.
Yeah.
Sure.
I'm already tired of it, so I'm hoping that a lot of people will catch on as well. I'm an AI. I'm on the dark side of AI. I don't think it's gonna take over the world. I think we're giving it too much power, and then there's some people that use it every day for every aspect of their lives, and I think, I don't know. So I'm on the fence about trusting it entirely. I say that like I'm in an action movie or something, like it's gonna be like Terminator, but I don't know. I don't know. I'm concerned. We'll see where it goes. I would like people to move back towards the shoppers to say we don't want AI, and then that way the businesses say, okay, well, we can't use AI anymore. The people like us that are not using AI for everything are saying, all right, we're doing that. So we'll see how it goes, but it's a very interesting thought always, and it's always a topic to bring up on any video is where are you in AI with this regard to your business? So yeah, I kind of on that one last to wrap up on this, I do want to ask you if all of our listeners out there pause this recording and they stopped and they opened up their own listing, all of our sellers out there, they paused the recording, they opened up their own listing. What is one thing, one element, let's say, of their main image or their A plus content that they should be checking right now against the AMZ one step standard to see if they're maybe leaving money on the table, if they're leaking conversions or they're not performing the best of their ability? What's one piece of content they should be looking at today to make sure it's up to snuff?
I think I'll give you a very easy one for everybody. Like it's not going to cost you any money, but it will make you a lot of money if done well. Just look at the sequence of your images and see if you're, like, does your second image really deserve to be at the second spot?
Mhm.
Or, like, is your fifth image really, does it really need to be there? Like, I think what I have seen, the lowest hanging fruit, I've run like lots of experiments where I've changed nothing. I've only changed the sequence of the images. Like I download all my reviews, my competitor reviews, ask AI to analyze that, prioritize the top pain point for me, the number one pain point, number two pain point, number two positive sentiment, number one positive sentiment, and then just based on that priority, just make sure your sequence has all that. That's just don't have your biggest pain point in the sixth image when it can be in your second image. Just change the sequence, make sure it just aligns with that, and run the experiment. It's not going to cost you anything, but it will make you more money. That's
Yeah.
that's one thing I would say.
Love it. Great answer. Kamal, thank you. I appreciate you talking to me. We'll have to have you back on. I do want to do an episode specifically centered around Prime Day coming up in sometime in July. So I want to talk more about how you can maximize conversions around that holiday. But I really appreciate you being a guest. I'll make sure to have your LinkedIn as well as AMZ's AMZ One Steps website down below in the description. Make sure all you listening out there to check both of those out. Connect with Kamal and check out his website. And, Kamal, thank you so much for being a guest.
Thank you so much. It was fun speaking with you, and looking forward to doing this, sometime in the future. Thanks for having.
Yes, absolutely. Right back at you. So, thank you all for watching. I'm your host, Velocity Pete, and we will see you next week.